They say some people are born with silver spoons. Jiho? He was born with a diamond-encrusted bit in his mouth, held by a mother who treats her son like a prestigious film award she hasn't quite decided where to display yet. I first saw him at the Hanyang Arts Academy orientation. He didn't walk into the auditorium. He floated. He was wearing a blazer that cost more than my father's annual salary, surrounded by a swarm of people who wanted a piece of his light. He was laughing, that bright, melodic sound that makes you think, man, some people really do have it all. I was in the back row, smelling like the deep fryer from my morning shift at the chicken shop, clutching a notebook with frayed edges. To me, he wasn't a person. He was a billboard, a reminder of everything I wasn't allowed to have. But that was the public Jiho, the one the cameras caught. 2 hours before that orientation, in the back of a black sedan with tinted windows, the air was freezing. Not because of the AC, but because of the woman sitting next to him. Lee Sora, the nation's sweetheart. To the world, she's grace personified. To Jiho, she's the warden. Your smile was tight at the press entrance, she had said, her voice like a silk cord tightening around her throat. You're representing the Lee name, Jiho. If you look miserable, the stocks dip. If the stocks dip, you're a liability. She didn't look at him when she struck him. It was a practiced, clinical movement. A correction, like fixing a stray hair. I'm sorry, Mother, Jiho had whispered, his voice steady, his face already rearranging itself back into that pleasant, blank mask. It won't happen again. I'll be perfect. And he was. 10 minutes later, he was out of that car, high-fiving strangers and acting like the luckiest kid in Seoul. My world was different. My world was loud, sweaty, and smelled like desperation. My name is Minute-Woo. I don't have a brand to protect. I have a dream that's currently drowning in a sea of past due utility bills. My parents don't hit me to make me perfect. They ignore me to make me quit. Idle, my father had spat that morning, not looking up from his bowl of rice. You're 20. You're a man. Stop dancing in front of mirrors and start thinking about a trade. Dreams don't put coal in the heater. Minute-Woo. I didn't argue. I couldn't. My throat was too tight with a secret I kept tucked under my heart. I didn't want to be an idol for the fame. I wanted it because when I'm on a stage, for 3 minutes, I don't feel like a kid from a cramped apartment with a ceiling that leaks every time it rains. I walked into the academy that day, my gym bag heavy on my shoulder. I was a ghost in the hallway, dodging the rich kids and their loud perfumes. I was heading to the practice rooms when I saw him again. Jiho. He was leaning against a locker, surrounded by 3 girls. He was telling a joke, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He looked happy, truly, annoyingly happy. I hated him instantly. I didn't know then that he was looking at me, too. I didn't know that behind that designer blazer, his ribs were aching from the tension of holding his breath. And I certainly didn't know that in 6 months, I'd be the only person in the world allowed to see him cry. This is how it started. 2 boys, 2 cages. One made of gold, one made of dust. And the moment our eyes met across that crowded hallway, the locks began to tan. Professor Han didn't believe in comfort zones. She believed in friction. According to her, the best art comes from 2 stones grinding against each other until they create a spark or turn into dust. Pair up, she announced, her voice cutting through the morning haze of the lecture hall. 1 performer, 1 producer. You have 10 weeks to create an original 3-minute piece. It must be vulnerable. It must be honest. If I see a mask, you fail. I looked down at my worn notebook. I already had a melody in my head, something jagged and lonely. I just needed a partner who wouldn't complain about practicing in the basement rooms where the heaters didn't work. Then, a shadow fell over my desk. A scent of expensive sandalwood and citrus hit me before I even looked up. Hey, scholar. I looked up. It was him, Jiho. He was leaning against my desk, one hand in his pocket, a playful smirk dancing on his lips. Up close, his skin was terrifyingly perfect. Not a single pore, not a single sign of the exhaustion I felt deep in my marrow. The name is Min-Woo, I said, my voice flatter than I intended. Min-Woo, he repeated, tasting the name like a new candy. I've seen your dance evaluations. You move like you're trying to break the floor. I like that. I'm Jiho, but you probably knew that. I closed my notebook with a sharp thud. I'm busy, Jiho. Find someone who wants to take selfies for your Instagram. He didn't flinch. In fact, his grin widened, but for a split second, his eyes stayed remarkably still. Ouch. Cold. But the professor already put our names together on a sheet. We're a team, partner. Unless you want to explain to the nation's actress why her son is failing his first semester. I led him down to practice room B12. It was the smallest room in the building, tucked next to the boiler. The walls were peeling, and the upright piano was 3 shades out of tune. Home sweet home, I muttered, dropping my bag. I expected him to make a face. I expected him to complain about the dust or the smell of old sweat. Instead, Jiho walked over to the piano and ran a finger over the keys. It's quiet down here, he whispered. His voice had lost that performative golden boy ring. For a moment, he looked small. Nobody comes down here, do they? Only the people who actually need to work. I snapped, pulling out my laptop. Look, let's get one thing straight. You provide the vocals, I'll handle the arrangement. We meet 3 times a week. Don't be late, and don't bring your fan club. Jiho sat on the piano bench, his designer jeans looking out of place on the cracked vinyl. He hit a low C. The note groaned, flat and mournful. My mother wants me to do a pop ballad, he said suddenly, not looking at me. Something sweeping, something inspiring. She already hired a songwriter to ghostwrite a track for me to present as my own. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then why are you here? If you already have a song, why bother with me? Jiho turned his head. The overhead flickering light caught the edge of his jaw. Because I hate that song. It sounds like a lie. He leaned forward, his eyes searching mine with a sudden, startling intensity. Teach me how to sound like the truth, Minwoo. Even if it's ugly. Especially if it's ugly. I stared at him. For the first time, I didn't see the rich kid or the billboard. I saw a hunger in his eyes that I recognized. It was the same hunger that kept me awake at 3 a.m., practicing until my toes bled. It's going to be hard, I warned him. I don't play nice. And if we do this my way, your mother's going to hate it. Jiho's smile returned, but this time, it didn't reach his eyes. It was sharper, braver. Good, he said softly. I think I'm tired of being liked. I opened my notebook and pushed it toward him. Fine. Then start by telling me the one thing you're most afraid of. We'll start the lyrics there. Jiho looked at the blank page. His hand trembled, just for a second, before he gripped the pen. That was the first day of the 10 weeks. The day the sun started to let the shadows in. It was 11 p.m. The academy was a ghost town, the kind of quiet that makes every heartbeat sound like a drum. We had been in B12 for 5 hours. The air was thick with the smell of bitter coffee and the ozone of overworked electronics. Jiho was slumped on the floor, his back against the peeling wallpaper. His tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck like a noose he'd finally loosened. He looked human. For the first time, he didn't look like a statue. Again, I said, leaning over the MIDI controller. The second verse. You're holding back. You're singing like you're afraid the neighbors will hear you. Jiho let out a dry, jagged laugh. In my house, the walls have ears, Minwoo. If I raise my voice, a maid reports it. If I cry, a doctor is called to adjust my vitamins. Silence is the only thing I actually own. I stopped the track. I walked over and sat on the floor across from him, our knees almost touching in the cramped space. The flickering fluorescent light above us hummed a low, dying note. We aren't in your house, I said softly. And I'm not your audience. I'm your partner. Give me the noise, Jiho. Give me the part of you that's screaming. He looked at me then. Truly looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, the dark circles he usually hid with concealer finally showing. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the lyrics we'd scratched out in my notebook. Lines about being a bird in a glass cage, about the coldness of a mother's touch. I can't, he whispered. If I start, I don't think I can stop. And I have to go back there tonight. I have to be the good son by 7 a.m. Then stay here. The words left my mouth before I could filter them. My heart hammered against my ribs. Practice until dawn. If you're too tired to pretend when you get home, then don't pretend. Let them see the cracks. Jiho's hand moved. He didn't grab the notebook. Instead, His fingers brushed against my wrist. His skin was ice cold, but where he touched me, it felt like a burn. Why are you doing this, Minwoo? You hate me. You've hated me since the first day. I don't hate you, I replied, my voice dropping to a low murmur. I hated the version of you that was fake. But this? The guy who's terrified of his own voice? I think I understand him. He leaned in, just an inch. The space between us was charged with everything we weren't saying. The pressure of my debt, the cruelty of his fame, the loneliness that had brought us both to this basement. For a second, I thought he was going to break. I thought he was going to lean his forehead against my shoulder and let the mask shatter completely. Bzzzzz. His phone vibrated on the hardwood floor like a gunshot. The screen lit up the room, casting a harsh, clinical white light over his face. One new message: Mother, the driver's outside. You have an early fitting for the Vogue shoot. Do not be late. Appearance is everything. The heat in the room vanished. Jiho pulled his hand back as if my skin had turned to lead. He stood up, smoothing his hair, his fingers working the knot of his tie with terrifying robotic precision. I have to go, he said. His voice was back, that bright, hollow golden boy chime. Thanks for the session, Minwoo. Same time Wednesday. He didn't wait for an answer. He picked up his designer bag and walked out, his footsteps clicking perfectly down the hall. I stayed on the floor for a long time, listening to the rain. I looked down at my wrist, where the ghost of his touch still lingered. He was wrong. Silence wasn't the only thing he owned. He also owned a piece of my mind now, and I had a feeling he wasn't going to give it back. If Jiho's world is a curated museum, mine is a construction site. It's loud, it's messy, and if you stop moving for even a second, you get trampled. It was Friday evening. I was finishing my second shift at the convenience store near the station, my head pounding from the neon lights and the endless loop of K-pop hits blasting from the overhead speakers. I was bagging groceries for a regular when the bell chimed. I didn't look up. Welcome. We have a 2-for-1 deal on. I stopped. The person standing at the counter didn't belong here. He was wearing a black hoodie pulled low, but the fabric was clearly cashmere. Even in the dim, flickering light of a bodega, his posture screamed private school. A pack of strawberry milk, the voice said. It was soft, hesitant. Jiho, I whispered, looking around to make sure the store was empty. What the hell are you doing here? This neighborhood isn't exactly your demographic. He pulled his hood back just enough for me to see a purple bruise blossoming along his jawline. He tried to smile, but it faltered. The driver was busy. I told him I was staying late at the library. I didn't want to go home yet. And your name was on the employee schedule I saw in your bag. I closed the shop early. My boss would kill me, but looking at the way Jiho was trembling, not from cold, but from pure, raw exhaustion, I couldn't just leave him there. We sat in the back room, surrounded by crates of ramen and stacks of bottled water. I handed him a warm can of coffee and a bag of cheap bread. My mother's correction for the week, he said, touching the bruise on his jaw. I missed a note during a private rehearsal. She said if I can't hit a high F, I don't deserve to look flawless for the cameras. I felt a surge of heat in my chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. She's insane, Jiho. That's not parenting. That's assault. It's legacy management, he corrected, his voice hollow. He took a bite of the bread, looking around the cramped, dusty room. Is this where you spend all your time? When you aren't at the academy? Here, the chicken shop, or delivering packages, I said, leaning back against a crate. My parents think I'm wasting my life. They see my dance shoes and think I'm trying to fly when I haven't even learned how to walk on the ground yet. Jiho looked at me, a strange, sad glint in his eyes. At least they see you, Minwoo. Even if they're disappointed, they're looking at you. My mother looks at me and sees a reflection of her own vanity. If the mirror is cracked, she just wants to replace it. He reached out and picked up my worn-out practice sneakers that were sticking out of my bag. He ran his thumb over the frayed laces. Teach me, he said suddenly. Teach you what? How to be like you. How to be okay with being unpolished. How to be dust instead of porcelain. I looked at him, this boy who had everything the world wanted, sitting on a milk crate in a back-alley convenience store, looking at my beat-up shoes like they were made of gold. It's not a lesson, Jiho, I said, my voice softening. It's a choice. You have to decide if the pain of staying in that cage is worse than the fear of falling once you leave it. He didn't answer. He just leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't smiling. He wasn't performing. He was just breathing. And in that moment, in the middle of the mud of my life, he looked more beautiful than any billboard I'd ever seen. The midterm evaluation. In this building, it's known as Judgment Day. The front row wasn't filled with students. It was filled with industry scouts, critics, and, sitting dead center like a queen on a throne, Lee Sora. I stood in the wings, my palms sweating against the cool metal of my laptop. I looked over at Ji-ho. He was back in the golden boy suit, white silk, hairstyled to perfection, a smile plastered on his face that looked like it had been painted on by a master forger. "You okay?" I whispered. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on his mother in the front row. I have the lyrics we wrote in my pocket, Minwoo. But the sheet music on the piano, it's the song she bought for me. The safe song. I grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at me. "If you sing that lie, you'll never find your voice again." The basement, the coffee, the bruises, was all of that for nothing. "Minwoo, you don't understand," he hissed, his voice trembling. "If I fail her here, she won't just punish me. She'll make sure you never get an audition in this city again." Before I could respond, the announcer's voice boomed. "Next up, representing the performance and production department, Lee Ji-ho and Han Minwoo." We walked out into the blinding white spotlight. I sat at the synth station. Ji-ho took his place at the grand piano. I looked at the judges, then at Lee Sora. She wasn't cheering. She was inspecting him like a piece of livestock. Ji-ho's hands hovered over the keys. He looked at the safe sheet music. Then he looked at me. I didn't nod. I didn't push him. I just waited. Suddenly, Ji-ho reached out and swept the sheet music off the piano. It fluttered to the floor like a dying bird. A gasp rippled through the room. I saw Lee Sora straighten her back, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. Ji-ho struck a chord. It wasn't the bright, poppy intro of the safe song. It was a low, dissonant minor chord, the sound of a heart cracking open. He started to sing. His voice wasn't pretty anymore. It was jagged. It was a roar wrapped in velvet. He sang about the silence in the hallways, the weight of the cameras, and the boy who was drowning in a sea of gold. The auditorium went dead silent. No one moved. Even the scouts leaned forward, their pens frozen over their clipboards. This wasn't a performance. It was a confession. I watched Lee Sora. Her face didn't change, but her knuckles were white as she gripped her designer handbag. She wasn't seeing a star. She was seeing a rebellion. As the song reached its climax, Ji-ho stood up from the piano, his voice soaring into a high note that vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't the perfect note his mother demanded. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated freedom. When the last note faded, Ji-ho was shaking. He stood in the center of the stage, the sweat dripping down his face, his chest heaving. He didn't look at the audience. He didn't look at the scouts. He looked at me. And for the first time since I met him, his smile was real. It was small, tired, and terrified, but it was his. "We're in trouble, aren't we?" he mouthed. I looked at his mother, who was already standing up to leave, her face a mask of cold fury. I looked at my own hands, still vibrating from the music we'd made. "The best kind of trouble," I whispered back. We walked off the stage as the highest-rated pair of the day. But as the heavy curtain fell behind us, blocking out the light, I knew the real battle hadn't even begun. The sun had finally set, and now we were going to have to learn how to survive the night together. Adrenaline is a liar. It makes you feel invincible right up until the moment it leaves you shivering in the dark. We weren't even halfway to the dressing rooms when the air in the hallway turned to ice. Standing there, flanked by two men in black suits who looked more like statues than humans, was Lee Sora. She didn't look angry. Anger is a human emotion. She looked like a technician staring at a piece of machinery that had finally, irrevocably broken. "The car is at the north exit," she said. Her voice was a low, terrifying hum. "Move." Ji-ho stepped in front of me. I could see the tremors in his shoulders, but his voice stayed locked in that new, iron-willed register he'd found on stage. "I'm not finished, Mother. The scouts. The scouts are talking about a mental breakdown, Ji-ho, she interrupted, stepping into the light. The fluorescent bulb overhead made her diamonds glitter like serrated teeth. I have already released a statement. You were overwhelmed. A temporary lapse in judgment due to exhaustion. We will be withdrawing you from the academy for a medical sabbatical. I couldn't stay quiet. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. You can't do that. Did you even hear him out there? That wasn't a breakdown. That was the first time he's been alive in years. Lee Sora's eyes flicked to me for the first time. It was like being stared at by a predator that had just realized it had to flee. And you, she said, her voice dripping with a poisonous kind of pity. The scholarship boy. I looked into your files, Minwoo. A very inspiring story. It would be a shame if your parents' mounting debts were suddenly called in by their creditors. Or if your name was blacklisted from every agency before you even finish your morning shift at the convenience store. Ji-ho flinched as if she'd struck him. Leave him out of this. It was my idea. I wrote the lyrics. I chose the chords. You chose nothing, she snapped, her mask finally slipping to reveal the jagged edge underneath. You are a product. I spent 20 years polishing you, and I will not have some bottom-tier dreamer scratch the surface because he thinks honesty sells records. Honesty is for people who can afford to be poor. You, Ji-ho, are an investment. The bodyguards moved forward, a wall of dark wool and muscle. They didn't touch him. They didn't have to. Their presence was a cage in motion. Ji-ho looked back at me. The golden boy was gone. The sun was gone. He looked like a kid standing on the edge of a cliff, realizing there was no net. Go, Minwoo, he whispered. His eyes were wide, pleading. Just go. Before she does it. Before she ruins you two. Ji-ho, wait. Don't, he shouted, and the sound echoed off the concrete walls. If you stay, I'll have to watch her break you. And I can't. I can't have that on my conscience. Please, just run. I watched them lead him away. I watched the heavy fire doors swing shut, cutting off the last glimpse of his white suit. I stood there in the hallway, smelling the faint scent of his sandalwood perfume and the stale, cold air of the basement. I was alone. I had my honesty. I had my music. But as I looked at my shaking hands, I realized that for the first time in my life, the dream didn't feel like enough. Because what's the point of being a star if you're shining in an empty sky? People think the punishment room in the Lee household would be dark. A cellar, maybe something out of a Gothic novel. It's actually the brightest room in the house. It's a library on the 3rd floor, encased in floor-to-ceiling glass. White marble floors, white bookshelves, white leather chairs. My mother calls it the reflection suite. I call it the vacuum, because in here there is no sound, no distraction, and eventually, no air. I've been here for 72 hours. The rules are simple. No phone, no music, no sunlight. The shutters are programmed to stay closed until Mother decides I've recovered my image. I am allowed a pen and a notebook, but only to write my formal apology to the board of directors and the academy. I looked at the crumpled paper on the floor. It was the 10th one. I, Lee Ji-ho, deeply regret my unprofessional behavior. I, Lee Ji-ho, apologize for the distress caused to my mother's reputation. Lies. Every word felt like ash in my mouth. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, I wasn't in the white vacuum anymore. I was back in a basement room with Minwoo. I could smell the cheap coffee. I could hear the rhythmic, grounding sound of him tapping his foot against a crate. Give me the noise, Ji-ho, he had said. I gripped the pen until my knuckles turned the color of the marble floor. I didn't write the apology. Instead, I started to draw. Not a picture, but a map. The exit codes for the security system. The shift changes for the guards. The distance from the perimeter fence to the nearest subway station. Mother thinks she's fixing the mirror. She doesn't realize that once glass is shattered, you can't just polish the cracks away. You only make the edges sharper. I didn't look up. I knew the rhythm of those steps. The apology, Ji-ho, my mother said. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant. She placed a tray on the table, a bowl of plain porridge and a vitamin shake. The recovery diet. The press is waiting for your statement. We've told them you're suffering from a temporary vocal cord inflammation brought on by stress. I'm not signing it, I said. My voice sounded thin, like a ghost's. She paused. I felt her shadow fall over me. The boy, Minwoo, is already being processed for expulsion. It was easy. A few words about bad influence and a stolen melody. He's back at his convenience store, Ji-ho, where he belongs. The pen snapped in my hand. Ink leaked across my palm, dark and staining like a bruise. You're wrong, I whispered, finally looking up at her. Her face was perfect as always, unmoved. He doesn't belong in a store, and I don't belong in a cage. You can take the music, and you can take the academy, but you can't make me be him again. The golden boy died in that auditorium. My mother smiled, but her eyes were like frozen lakes. Then you'll stay here until you remember how to bring him back to life. Eat your breakfast, Ji-ho. You look pale. Sound of the door sliding shut. The heavy thump of the lock engaging again. Narrator. I looked at the black ink on my hand. It looked like the notes of the song we wrote together. She thinks she's won because she has the keys. But she forgot one thing. She raised me to be a performer. She taught me how to watch an audience, how to find their weaknesses, and how to wait for the perfect moment to take the stage. I looked at the security camera in the corner of the ceiling. I didn't hide my ink-stained hand. I just sat back in the white chair and waited for the moon to rise. Minwoo is out there. And if he's the dust and I'm the porcelain, then it's time to see what happens when the dust gets into the gears of the machine. Tonight, the architecture of silence is coming down. Midnight, the hour of ghosts and thieves. I had spent 4 hours memorizing the sweep of the security camera in the corner. Every 45 seconds, it pivots left to cover the hallway, leaving a blind spot behind the marble pillar for exactly 6 seconds. 6 seconds to breathe. 6 seconds to move. I didn't take anything with me. No designer clothes, no watch, no shoes that would click on the floor. I walked in my socks, feeling the bite of the cold marble against my soles. The ink on my hand was dry now, a permanent reminder of the truth I was running toward. I reached the service elevator. Code 0-9-2-7. The date of my father's funeral. The only day my mother ever looked vulnerable. It was the only code she never bothered to change because she assumed I was too afraid of the memory to use it. The basement garage smelled of gasoline and expensive wax. I stayed in the shadows, moving behind the pillars. The exit gate was 50 yards away. Past the gate was the street. Past the street was the subway. Past the subway was Minwoo. I reached the side door, the one the caterers used. My hand touched the cold metal handle. I could see the city lights flickering through the narrow window. They looked like stars. Real ones. Click. The handle didn't move. A sudden, blinding floodlight hit me from above, turning the garage into a surgical theater. I squinted, my eyes stinging, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it would burst through my ribs. Leaving so soon, Ji-ho? The shadow that stepped into the light wasn't my mother. It was Secretary Park. Her right hand, a man who had more ice in his veins than the reflection suite. Behind him stood 4 security guards, their faces obscured by the glare. The 0927 code was a nice touch, Park said, his voice flat and professional. But your mother doesn't play games, Ji-ho. She plays chess. She knew the moment you stopped writing those apologies that you were looking for the door. I backed away, but my heel hit the bumper of sedan. I was surrounded. The escape had been a trap, a way to see if I was truly broken or just waiting. Get away from me, I said, but even to my own ears my voice sounded small. You're tired, Ji-ho, Park said, stepping closer. He held out a hand, but it wasn't an offer of help. It was an order. You've had your little adventure. You've played the rebel. But look at you. You're in your socks, shivering in a garage, chasing a boy who has already been erased from the academy records. It's over. It's not over, I snarled, trying to bolt to the left. Sound of a scuffle, the scuff of socks on concrete, the heavy grunt of a struggle, and the metallic clink of handcuffs. Narrator, they didn't hurt me. They were too well trained for that. They just pinned me against the cold metal of the car, my cheek pressed against the polished paint. The handcuffs were tight, cold, biting circles of steel that felt like the final version of my mother's safe song. Take him to the car, Park ordered. Not the library. the estate in Gapyeong. We need to ensure there are no more distractions until the rebranding is complete. As they dragged me toward the black SUV, I looked up at the small window one last time. I saw a single, distant light from the city. I thought of Min-woo, probably sitting in that back room of the convenience store, waiting for a text that would never come. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just let the silence take me. Because if they were going to turn me into a ghost, then I would become the kind that haunts you until you lose your mind. The medical sabbatical lasted exactly 1 week. On Monday morning, a black sedan pulled up to the front gates of Hanyang Arts Academy. The doors opened, and out stepped the ghost of Lee Ji-ho. He looked exactly the same, the tailored blazer, the perfect hair, the designer bag. But the light I'd seen in the basement was gone. His eyes were like 2 pieces of polished flint. And he wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 teaching assistants who looked suspiciously like they could bench press a piano. I was standing by the fountain, my heart lodged in my throat. I took a step forward, his name already on my lips. Ji-ho. He didn't even flinch. He walked right past me, his shoulder brushing mine, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere in the far distance. It was as if I had turned into glass. Don't look. Don't look. If you look at him, they win. Secretary Park's voice was still ringing in my head from the drive over. You are allowed to finish the semester on one condition. You do not speak to Han Min-woo. You do not look at him. You do not acknowledge his existence. If you do, his family's debt is sold to a collection agency by noon. He won't just be expelled. He'll be homeless. I felt Min-woo's heat as I passed him. I could smell the faint scent of the cheap laundry detergent he used. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stop, to grab him, to tell him about the garage and the handcuffs. Instead, I tightened my grip on my bag and kept walking. I sat in the back of the music theory lecture. My assistants sat in the row directly behind me. I felt the weight of their eyes on the back of my neck. Across the room, I saw Min-woo. He was staring at me, his brow furrowed, his pen trembling in his hand. I opened my notebook. I didn't take notes on the lecture. I just wrote the same word over and over again until the ink bled through the paper. Wait, wait, wait. I caught him by the lockers during the lunch break. I knew the cameras were watching, but I didn't care. I intercepted him before his shadows could close the gap. Ji-ho, stop. I grabbed his sleeve. He stopped, but he didn't turn around. His back was as rigid as a tombstone. What did she do to you? I whispered, my voice thick with a mix of anger and terror. I saw the news. I saw the exhaustion statement. I've been calling you every night. Why are you acting like I'm a stranger? For a split second, I saw his hand twitch. He wanted to reach back. I knew he did. I don't know who you are, he said. The voice didn't belong to the boy who sat on a milk crate in my convenience store. It was cold. It was clinical. It was the voice of the golden boy at 100% volume. We were partners, I said, my grip tightening on his blazer. We wrote a song. You said it was the truth. It was a mistake, Ji-ho said, finally turning his head just enough for me to see his profile. His jaw was set so tight it looked like it might break. I was tired. You were a curiosity. My mother was right. We don't belong in the same world, Min-woo. Please, don't touch me again. He pulled his arm away. The movement was so sharp, so final, it felt like a slap. The 2 men in suits stepped between us, their shadows swallowing me whole. They didn't say a word. They just created a wall of muscle and silence. Ji-ho walked away without looking back. I stood there, surrounded by the smell of expensive sandalwood and the sound of my own heart breaking. He was lying. I knew he was lying. I'd seen the way his eyes searched the room for me before he'd checked himself. He wasn't ignoring me to hurt me. He was ignoring me to save me. I looked down at the floor and saw a small, crumpled piece of paper that had fallen when he pulled his arm away. I stepped on it, hiding it under my shoe until the hallway cleared. When I was finally alone in the bathroom stall, I smoothed it out. It wasn't a letter. It was a lyric, a single line from the song we hadn't finished. The moon still shines, even when the sun refuses to look. He was still in there. And if he couldn't talk to me, then I was going to have to find a way to make the whole world listen for him. If Ji-ho is a prisoner of a golden cage, then I am a ghost in the machine. I know the Hanyang Arts Academy security routes better than the janitors. I know that at 2:15 a.m., The guard at the north wing takes a 7-minute smoking break behind the gym. I know that the lock on the basement window of the music wing has been loose since 2022. I slid through the gap, the scent of damp earth and old concrete filling my lungs. I didn't turn on my phone light. I didn't need to. My feet knew the way to B12. The room felt different. Cold. It smelled like dust and the lingering ghost of Jiho's perfume. On the piano, a single white rose sat in a glass of water, a gift from Fan, or maybe a reminder from his mother that he was always being watched. I sat at the bench. I didn't play a chord. A chord would be too loud. It would alert the night shift. Instead, I pulled a small, portable digital recorder from my bag, the one I used to capture melodies on the bus. Jiho, if you're hearing this, it means you've come back to the only place where we were ever honest. I took a deep breath. I reached into the back of the upright piano, where the dampening felt was slightly torn. I tucked the recorder deep into the wooden frame, near the high C strings. I know why you're doing it, I whispered into the dark. I know about the debt. I know she's using me to keep you in line. But she forgot one thing, Jiho. You can't bribe the music. You can't buy the way your voice shakes when you're telling the truth. I pressed play on a pre-recorded track I'd spent all night mixing in the convenience store backroom. It was just 3 minutes of audio. A loop of the melody we made, overlaid with the sound of the rain from the night he first touched my wrist. It was a frequency only he would recognize. I'm not going to let her erase us, I said, my voice cracking. I'm going to finish the arrangement. I'm going to put it where she can't reach it. Look for the fan chant files on the day of the final showcase. I'll be waiting at the finish line. My heart leaped into my throat. I didn't have time to hide. I scrambled under the piano, pressing my back against the cold floorboards, my breath held until my lungs burned. The door to B12 creaked open. A beam of light swept across the room, illuminating the white rose, the peeling wallpaper, and the empty piano bench. The light lingered on the piano for a heartbeat. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure the guard could hear it through the floor. Click. The door closed. The footsteps faded. I crawled out, shaking, my clothes covered in the dust of the basement. I looked at the piano one last time. The recorder was hidden. The message was set. I left the way I came, disappearing into the city fog. I didn't know if he would find it. I didn't know if he would even have the courage to come back to this room. But as I walked toward the subway, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. My life has become a series of monitor breaths. Every move I make is logged. Every bathroom break, every meal, every practice session. Secretary Park calls it protection. I call it being a living corpse. My assistants, 2 men named Kim and Choi, never speak. They just stand at the door of every room I enter, their shadows stretching across the floor like bars. But today, the air felt different. It was the afternoon of the pre-showcase rehearsal. The academy was a hive of nervous energy, and even the guards seemed distracted by the influx of press and VIP parents in the lobby. I need to warm up my lower register, I said, my voice flat. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on the peeling paint of the hallway. Room B12. The acoustics are better for the low notes. Choi checked his watch. The main hall is available, Mr. Lee. Your mother prefers. My mother isn't the one singing tonight. I snapped, letting a flicker of the spoiled star persona bleed through. I'm going to be 12. You can stand outside the door and listen to me hit flat notes for an hour, or you can go get the coffee my mother likes from the cafe across the street. She'll be here in 20 minutes. They exchange a look. The mention of my mother's arrival did the trick. Kim nodded, signaling Choi to stay at the door while he headed for the exit. I sat at the piano. I didn't touch the keys yet. I waited. I heard the scuff of Choi's boots as he leaned against the door outside. I was alone, but I wasn't free. I ran my hand along the wood of the upright piano. It was cold and dusty. My heart started a race. Why had I come here? Was I just looking for the ghost of the boy I used to be? Then I saw it. A tiny, microscopic piece of blue tape stuck to the side of the high C string cover. My breath hitched. I reached into the back of the piano, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the dampening felt. My nails caught on something hard, something plastic. I pulled it out, a small, black digital recorder. Jiho, if you're hearing this, his voice. It hit me like a physical blow. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. I pressed the recorder against my ear, hiding it behind my hand in case Choi looked through the small glass pane in the door. I know why you're doing it. I know she's using me to keep you in line. But she forgot one thing, Ji-ho. You can't bribe the music. I closed my eyes. The white marble of the estate, the handcuffs in the garage, the cold threats of Secretary Park. It all started to dissolve. I wasn't a product. I wasn't a brand. I was the boy who liked strawberry milk and jagged melodies. Look for the fan chant files on the day of the final showcase. I'll be waiting at the finish line. The recording ended with the sound of the rain. The same rain from Chapter 3. The night I realized I didn't want to be liked. I wanted to be known. I acted quickly. I didn't put the recorder back. I slid it into my sock, the hard plastic biting into my ankle, a secret weight, a hidden weapon. I stood up and straightened my blazer. I looked at the white rose in the glass. It was wilting. I reached out and snapped the stem, tucking the dying flower into my breast pocket. I opened the door. Choi was standing there, his face unreadable. "Is everything all right, sir?" he asked, his eyes scanning the room. "Everything is perfect," I said. And for the first time in weeks, the smile I gave him wasn't a lie. It was a threat. I walked past him, my head held high. The architecture of silence was still standing, but I could hear the foundations groaning. Minwoo was waiting at the finish line, and I was done running from the dark. It was time to burn the stage down. This is it, the final showcase. To the world, it's a graduation ceremony for the elite. To me, it's a heist. I sat in the back of the tech booth, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was expelled, after all. But a black hoodie and a stolen staff badge from one of my fan chant files followers had gotten me past the side door. I looked at the master control board. In 30 seconds, Ji-ho would take the stage to sing his mother's safe ballad. And in 31 seconds, I was going to override the feed. "Ready?" I whispered into my headset. 100 miles away, in bedrooms and internet cafes across the country, my subscribers replied with a wave of green heart emojis on the livestream chat. They were ready. The fan chant was about to go global. I stood in the center of the light. My mother was in the front row, her face a mask of triumphant calm. She thought she had won. She thought the medical sabbatical had scrubbed the rebellion out of me. I sang the first 3 lines of the safe song. My voice was perfect. It was hollow. It was a lie. Then, I felt the vibration against my ankle, the digital recorder tucked into my sock. Wait for the finish line. Suddenly, the speakers didn't emit the orchestral backtrack. They emitted a glitch, a sharp, digital screech that made the audience gasp. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in shock. On the giant screens, the world saw the nation's son sitting on a milk crate, eating cheap bread with a scholarship boy. They heard my real voice, not the polished studio version, but the one that cracked with emotion. I looked at my mother. For the first time in my life, she looked small. She was standing up, her mouth open, her legacy crumbling in the glow of the LED screens. I didn't stop. I stepped away from the microphone stand, ripped off my earpiece, and looked directly into the main camera. "My name is Lee Ji-ho," I said, my voice echoing through the rafters. "And I am not a product. I'm not a brand. I am a boy who is tired of being quiet." I watched him from the booth, tears blurring my vision. He was glowing, not because of the spotlights, but because he was finally, irrevocably free. The security guards were scrambling toward the stage, and the tech leads were trying to wrestle the controls away from me. But it was too late. The video had already been mirrored 1,000,000 times. The truth was trending. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a god. It was Professor Han. She looked at the screen, then at me, and nodded once. "Finish the mix, Minute Wu. Make it loud." 1 year later, we aren't in the city. We aren't in a basement. We're sitting on the edge of a pier in a small fishing village, our legs dangling over the water. Ji-ho's mother tried to sue. She tried to bury us, but the fans wouldn't let her. They wanted the dust and porcelain duo. They wanted the truth. Ji-ho reached over and took the headphones off my ears. He looked different now. His hair was messy, his clothes were cheap, and he had a tiny scar on his jaw where the correction had been. But his eyes, They were brighter than the sun. "What are you listening to?" he asked, leaning his head on my shoulder. "The rough cut for the next album," I said, sliding an earbud into his ear. "It's a bit unpolished. A bit ugly." Jiho closed his eyes, a real, effortless smile spreading across his face. "Perfect. I think I'm done with perfect forever." I looked at him, then out at the horizon where the moon was beginning to rise. We were still poor, we were still fighting for every audition, and we were still the best kind of trouble. But as the music played, our music, I realized that the architecture of silence was gone. In its place, we had built something that could never be torn down. We had built a home. If you want to see more stories of love, rebellion, and finding your voice, please subscribe and join the family. Don't forget to hit the like button if these two captured your heart.